Fox News alert, we are awaiting President Trump's meeting with the Chinese vice premier at the White House this next hour. The president is sitting down with him to strike a deal to end a long-running trade dispute between the world's two largest economies. I'm Harris Faulkner on this Friday. Let's go outnumbered overtime. High-level talks going on as both sides try to reach that agreement ahead of a March 1st deadline that could see tariffs increased on Chinese imports from 10 to 25%. The pressure is on. This Wall Street Journal headline caught our eye. U.S. bets on China's special envoy in trade talks. The article begins, quote, as U.S.-China trade talks reach a pivotal point, the president's administration is counting on the Chinese leader's special envoy, Liu Hu, to get Beijing to accept tough new structures that are increasingly controversial in Beijing. Rich Edson from the White House lawn now. Rich?
Good afternoon, Harris. And the U.S. and China are trying to avoid a major escalation in this trade fight, and they've got about a week to do it. Chinese and American negotiators discussing this here in downtown Washington. In about 90 minutes, the president is scheduled to meet with the top trade negotiator, the Chinese vice premier, in the Oval Office. They had previously met in the latter part of last month after the latest rounds of negotiations. President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping have set a March 1st deadline to resolve these trade issues before the U.S. raises tariffs on $200 billion in Chinese imports. The president, though, has indicated that deadline could slide, especially if the two sides are moving closer to an agreement. The United States is trying to narrow the $380 billion annual trade imbalance with China and wants the Chinese government to curb subsidies of their domestic companies and to stop stealing American trade secrets. The Wall Street Journal reports Chinese negotiators have offered to stop providing subsidies, though they have yet to provide a list of the subsidies they would eliminate. The Journal also reports China has focused its pitch on buying more American agriculture. A major part of these negotiations is ensuring the two sides can enforce any agreement. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told the Fox Business Network that China has failed to honor previous commitments on cyber and other issues, and that the United States will not fall into those same pitfalls again. The U.S. and China are also at odds over the Chinese telecom company Huawei, with the Secretary of State reminding other countries and pressing other countries to avoid using Huawei technologies because of the U.S. claims that there are security concerns in doing so. Harris?
Rich Edson, thank you very much. I want to bring in chief political anchor Bret Baier now, special report anchor and executive editor. Bret, good to see you today.
Hey,
you know, for this current president, relationships mean so much. With China's president, what is the status on the connection between these two men?
Well, the President Trump speaks all the time about a relationship he's established with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Refers back to their meeting in Mar-a-Lago, suggests that there is going to be another one to come, where he says, you know, he loads a lot of respect onto President Xi. This special envoy, Mr. Liu, is the vice premier, one of 4 vice premiers in China. He is given this title, special envoy, and it's seen by really the world as having juice now to negotiate and actually do a deal. And you saw the video of the vice premier in the Oval Office with the president. That got a lot of coverage back in Beijing as he spoke English with the president and said that China was ready to buy more soybeans. So expect for some moment to happen today at 2:30 that perhaps continues this optimism about a U.S.-China, progress on trade.
Bret, what can you tell us about that March 1st deadline? I mean, have we ever faced anything like this before, where you would see tariffs jump from 10 to 25% on another country's goods?
It's self-imposed. I mean, this is what the U.S. went in with this deadline, but the president kind of backed off that, being asked about it, saying it's not a, quote, magic date. So I don't think March 1st will be, the poof, it's suddenly 25%. I think these negotiations are suggesting that there's optimism. You look at the markets today, hovering above 26,000, the 9th day in a row. There is this sense that something is happening from the inside of these meetings that perhaps is going to be good news for both countries. The biggest sticking point, though, is intellectual property and how China deals with that in the long term.
Intellectual property theft.
Theft, yeah.
Yeah, that's been the point. All right, so we will step away from this and talk a little bit now about North Korea, because it's a week from yesterday that these two men will be meeting Kim Jong-un. I want to first go to Lindsey Graham, Senator Graham, talking about the expectations for this. Let's watch.
My expectations are to give up his nuclear weapons over time, to convince him that he is better off without a nuclear arsenal than he is with one. His nuclear weapons could fall in the hands of people who would actually use them if he would not. The president is right to want this transition from a nuclear North Korea to a non-nuclear North Korea. The Japanese don't have nukes. South Korea don't have nukes.
Bret, if you'll allow me, I want to go to Representative Eliot Engel, too, a Democrat, one of three, who says that they would like to see a briefing, because I think these two pieces fit together as oppositional. Let's watch, and I'll come right to you, Bret.
The bottom line is that anything, the finished product that would be acceptable to me, would be one that would guarantee that North Korea would destroy all of its nuclear weapons. Short of that, it's not really a deal to get rid of nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. And so we really don't know what the administration is looking for, what they've accepted, what they haven't accepted. Why should we be in the dark? We should be informed. As members of Congress, that's the way our Constitution goes.
Bret, can you unpack both those? They're not necessarily oppositional, but they're different.
No, they are different, and one has the hope and optimism that something tangible is going to come out of this second summit, and the other one is kind of a pessimism but wants to know exactly what the deal looks like. What we're hearing from the administration is that they do have expectations this time. They're not going to lay them out for us before the summit begins, but they do feel like the fact that there hasn't been missile testing, there hasn't been nuclear testing, is a sign, even though the U.S. intelligence sees still some building up in their nuclear program. I think that the site in Hanoi, Vietnam, and we'll be there next week, is part of the message, as Singapore was, which is a message of economic strength, that you too could be like Vietnam after the war established a real economic tie with the U.S. and is really booming. It's 10 times as strong as its gross domestic product since the 1980s. Singapore, similar, booming. And I think that's the message that President Trump is going to try to give to Kim Jong-un.
And not to put too fine a point on the connection points here, but Vietnam also sits in a very interesting location with regard to China as well. I'll give you last word.
China is integral to this whole thing, and it is a message that the Chinese, not only on the trade, which we started talking about, but specifically on the North Korea negotiation, they are the linchpin. And this is kind of like the little brother. And if China gives the hat tip and really pushes North Korea, you may see them get across the finish line.
Real quickly, as you head into that part of the world, we cannot miss the timing of all of this. You've got that March 1st date for China, and then for North Korea, there really isn't a deadline or a timeline, or is there?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to give us a deadline or a timeline, but I think that they want to see some tangible progress, definitely on the trade front, but most particularly on North Korea. And I expect to see, you have to see something that they come home, some deliverable after this meeting in Hanoi. We'll be able to give you some behind the scenes and try to get some, talking to some of the players that give us a little more contextual stuff next week, and I'll join you and give you a sense from Vietnam. We
love it. Thank you for leading the coverage from there. We look forward to it. 6 p.m. tonight, though, for Bret Baier and Special Report. Thank you.
T. Harris.
Fox News Alert. Stunning developments in Florida, where New England Patriots owner Robert Kraft has been charged with soliciting prostitution. Kraft has not been arrested, but a warrant has been issued to his attorneys. Molly Line, live for us from Boston. Molly?
Exactly. Robert Kraft, the 77-year-old owner of the recently Super Bowl winning New England Patriots, now facing charges for soliciting a prostitute on 2 occasions out of Jupiter, Florida. He's among a group of men, but certainly the most prominent name on that list, charged after an 8-month multi-agency investigation into a human trafficking operation. The investigation focused on several massage parlors where women, mostly believed to be from China, were forced to work long hours as sex workers in sexual servitude. The business that Kraft was allegedly driven to was called the Orchids of Asia Day Spa. Surveillance video was a part of this investigation. Here are investigators.
Appearances of obvious money laundering in this case that we'll be investigating further. Much of our evidence comes directly from the businesses, also from body-worn cameras of our officers, and also surveillance that we had been conducting over the last several months.
And there were quite a few search warrants issued. Investigators went through the trash of this business. But in addition to that surveillance video may be a critical part of this case, because today investigators confirmed that they have on video that shows Kraft on camera receiving alleged acts. The owner of the spa also arrested. Now, it's worth noting that these charges against Kraft are misdemeanor charges, soliciting another to commit prostitution. Now, we do have a statement. This is from a Robert Kraft spokesperson who says, "We categorically deny that Mr. Kraft engaged in any illegal activity. Because it is a judicial matter, we will not be commenting further." Now, as you mentioned, this happened in Palm County, and those that are residents of Palm County will essentially receive a summons to appear in court. But because Mr. Kraft lives outside of the county, an arrest warrant has essentially been issued. So we don't know what the next steps are as to when potentially Mr. Kraft could potentially be traveling to Florida. Harris?
All right, Molly Line, stay on it. We'll come to you as the news warrants. Thank you very much. An update now on the scandal surrounding Virginia's Democratic Lieutenant Governor. Fox News has confirmed the Virginia Assembly has invited Justin Fairfax and his accusers to testify in April about sex assault allegations against him. Two of the women accusing him of sexual assault. Dr. Vanessa Tyson says Fairfax forced her to perform oral sex at the Democratic convention in Boston. Meredith Watson claims he raped her in 2004 when they were students at Duke University. The invite comes after Tyson's lawyer sent a letter to Virginia lawmakers asking why there has been no action since Tyson and Watson made their claims public more than 2 weeks ago. Dozens of Democrats initially called for Fairfax to resign. He maintains his innocence and says he wants an FBI investigation. The White House has announced that some 200 United States troops will remain in Syria, backing off President Trump's earlier call for a full withdrawal. The troops will remain there in a peacekeeping role to reassure our allies concerned about an Islamic State resurgence. Jennifer Griffin with the news at the Pentagon. Jennifer?
Harris, the president's top national security advisors just finished meeting here at the Pentagon in the Tank. That's the secure conference room that is used for the most secret discussions and war planning. We just saw John Bolton, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo leave the meeting, and my colleague Lucas Tomlinson spoke to Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan, who said he was very pleased at the president's decision to leave at least 200 American troops on the ground in Syria. Shanahan received an earful from U.S. allies angry at the sudden decision to pull out. He hosted the Belgian defense minister here at the Pentagon yesterday. France and Britain had told U.S. officials, like Senator Lindsey Graham, that if the U.S. pulls out, they would too. Graham spoke to the president last night and welcomed the president's about-face.
I think it's a very smart decision by the president. He listened to sound military advice. He adjusted his policies. The goal is to make sure ISIS doesn't come back. If we'd have kept troops in Iraq, we would never had ISIS. Now that the caliphate's destroyed, and it really has been destroyed, congratulations, Mr. President, on making that happen, this 200 will attract probably 1,000 Europeans.
Senator Graham said the U.S. troops would make up 20% of the force on the ground in Syria. Europe would make up the rest, he said. Half the American troops would remain in the north to help establish a buffer zone between the Turks and the Kurds. Another 100 American troops would remain in the south on the border with Jordan to keep an eye on Iranian forces using Syria as a land bridge. U.S. and Iraqi officials said about 1,000 ISIS fighters have slipped across the border from Syria into Iraq and are destabilizing the fragile peace there. Acting Defense Secretary Shanahan is preparing to meet his Turkish counterpart in the next few hours here at the Pentagon. Sensitive discussions are underway to set up a buffer zone in northern Syria so that U.S. Kurdish allies who have helped destroy ISIS are not attacked. President Trump spoke to the Turkish president by phone yesterday. Harris?
Yeah, there were a lot of people on the Hill that were wanting to see that happen on both sides of the political aisle. That's a big development. Jennifer, thank you very much. President Trump facing new resistance in Congress over his emergency declaration at the southern border. One House Republican joins us on what to expect next. And dramatic video of a shootout between a sheriff's deputy and an illegal immigrant, who we now know had been deported 3 times before this. Stay with me.
Okay.
Shots fired, shots fired.
This program is brought to you by eBay.
Authorities now are confirming that a man who opened fire on a California sheriff's deputy this week was in the country illegally and had been deported 3 times prior to 2011. And we're also getting dramatic body camera video of the gunfight between the suspect and the officer. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt is in Los Angeles with the story. Jonathan?
Harris, this graphic and shocking shootout has once again put the spotlight on the 2017 California Values Act. Critics call it a sanctuary law, with immigration officials saying it's those kind of laws that prevented them from previously arresting and deporting the illegal immigrant who started the gunfight and eventually died as a result of it. Javier Hernandez Morales is seen in body cam footage from the camera worn by Napa County Sheriff's Deputy Riley Jarecki, and after a brief conversation, he opens fire. He misses, but Jarecki moves, fires back, and kills Hernandez Morales.
Shots fired, shots fired.
Hernandez Morales was an illegal immigrant. He had been deported twice in 2007 and once in 2010. Since 2011, Immigration and Customs Enforcement said it had apparently issued 4 separate detainers for Hernandez Morales. Basically, those are requests to hold the arrested person for longer so that ICE can begin deportation proceedings. Those detainers were after arrests related to DUI, battery on a peace officer, selling liquor to a minor, and unknown probation violations. None of those detainers was honored by jail staff at the Napa and Sonoma County jails, according to ICE officials, who said in a statement, quote, "ICE is grateful the deputy involved in this shooting was not harmed during this attack. It's unfortunate that our law enforcement partners and the community are subjected to dangerous consequences because of inflexible state laws that protect criminal aliens." Now, the California Values Act essentially prohibits local law enforcement from cooperating with federal immigration officials, keeping illegal immigrants arrested on relatively minor offenses in jail, for instance, at the request of immigration authorities, or asking those arrested about their immigration status. The sheriff in this case is just glad his deputy is alive.
When you're in that situation, when you're in a gun battle, you want to win. And she did beautifully. She did what she was trained to do.
Now, the bottom line here, Harris, is local law enforcement are proud of the work of one of their own to take down a dangerous habitual criminal, while federal immigration enforcement say it never needed to get to the point that a deputy could have lost her life. Harris?
Wow. Jonathan, thank you very much. Democrats introducing new resolution blocking President Trump's declaration of a national emergency at the southern border. House Speaker Pelosi has stepped up her battle against the president's border wall. Watch.
Promise was that Mexico was going to pay for it. So it was declaring, the president of the United States declaring a national emergency to honor an applause line in a rally. Not only is he disrespecting the Congress, the legislative branch, and the Constitution of the United States, he is dishonoring the office in which he served.
That was from a news conference call not long ago. Republican Congressman Chris Stewart serves on the Intelligence and Appropriations Committees. Congressman Stewart, great to have you on the program. First of all, I just want to get your reaction to Democrats pushing so hard and now on the record with a resolution against this president.
Yeah, you know, you listen to Ms. Pelosi, and I think most Americans think she's the worst spokesman that they could have for this because she isn't serious about border security, and she made that very clear. Harris, this is frustrating for me. Remember this, a year ago we were trying to get $25 billion for border security on the Appropriations Committee, which I sit. That was what the original language called for. We went to 15 to 10 to 5.7, and Ms. Pelosi's response was always not one penny, not $1. And now she's so hypercritical of the president for him doing what he desperately thinks is necessary for the security of the American southern border.
This from Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, obviously. If the president's emergency declaration prevails, it will fundamentally change the balance of power and the way our country's founders never envisioned. Is he right about that?
Well, did he say the same thing when Barack Obama did something that many of us had objections to, and that is when he declared his DACA policy for Dreamers, which clearly were unconstitutional. They're clearly the prerogative of the Congress to set immigration policy. In fact, it's so clear that the president himself admitted previous to doing this that he didn't have the authority to do that. And I think we need to be consistent, Republicans or Democrats. When President Obama did that, I said he doesn't have the authority. He's not a king. He's a president. And I've also been consistent with President Trump. It worries me that he did a declaration here that I'm not convinced he has the authority to do. There actually is some very intelligent constitutional scholars, and their opinions on this is split. I look forward to seeing how the president actually this appropriated money, out of what silos it comes from. But Mr. Schumer is, I think, crying enormous crocodile tears when he's critical of this president, but was entirely supportive of President Obama for something which was much more clearly outside of his authority to do.
It's so interesting to hear you talk that way, because you're taking the Democrats to task, but you're also saying that maybe not the way to go for the Republican president either. Very interesting, Congressman Stewart. I want to move on now to what's happening with the Mueller investigation. First of all, let's hear from the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani. All right. Well, we're not going to hear from him. You're going to hear me read it. So there we go. We expect something in the next 2 weeks. If Mueller clears the president, we walk away and say thank you. If it is damaging, then we will respond. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that's about right. We've seen indications. We don't have clear insight into the Mueller investigation. It's separate from the House Intelligence Committee, but we do have some indications. We know that some prosecutors have left. They haven't been replaced. He's clearly moved some of these cases to other district courts, a southern district in New York, in some cases of Virginia. Indications where he was beginning to ramp down. I've been saying for a couple months now, I think he's close, and I think a lot of Americans who expect and lay awake at night think we're going to impeach Donald Trump are going to be very disappointed with the Mueller conclusions. I don't think there's going to be any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, and I think this is going to make that clear. One thing I hope to see as well, Harris, and that is for the report to be released. I hope every word of it is released. For one thing,
William
I know it doesn't.
Barr, the new AG, says he'll do it according to the rules and the protocols, and of course any redactions would have to do with sources and methods, right?
Exactly, and the sources and methods is the key to this, because we know this isn't truly in the normal sphere of national security. We're not talking about foreign agents. We're talking about inside politics. And the American people, I think, realize that. We're not talking about Russian spies or Chinese spies. This is American politics. And if we don't release it, if we redact anything, a lot of people are going to say, see, the collusion is in those redactions. It's in this line. It's in this paragraph. They just won't tell us. And I'm afraid the conspiracy theories will live on for years about, well, this is what we don't know because they hid it from us.
Well, Rudy Giuliani just gave us a bit of a timeline. It's frustrated by all of the fast fire reporting, maybe with or without the facts earlier this week, that it's coming within days. But we'll cover it when it happens. I see the great state of Utah behind you. Congressman Stewart, good to see you.
Come out and let's go skiing.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks. Actor Jussie Smollett is out on bail and facing serious charges as the producers of Empire make a big decision about his role on the TV show.
I think I finally found my
A federal judge has ordered that Coast Guard officer held without bail for 2 weeks while investigators gather additional evidence. Lieutenant Christopher Hassan is accused of stockpiling weapons and ammunition while making a hit list of targets that include prominent Democrats and journalists. Peter Ducey is on the story from D.C. Peter?
Harris, the government is alleging that Christopher Hassan was trying to figure out which Democratic lawmakers don't have security details as he filled out that hit list and Googled things like this. What if Trump illegally impeached? Best place in D.C. to see Congresspeople. Where in D.C. do Congress live? Civil war if Trump impeached. Social Democrats USA. This man, accused of being a domestic terrorist, also had a deleted file on his computer where he wrote of a dream to carry out a biological attack followed by an attack on the food supply using Spanish flu, botulism, or anthrax. He had a cache of weapons and ammo and drugs. And a Coast Guard colleague tells our Jennifer Griffin that he kept a clean desk, rode a Harley to work, and didn't really joke or smile, but never let on that he described himself as a white nationalist. His neighbors seemed surprised by all of this, too.
This is a quite decent neighborhood.
It's really scary to know that you've been living around this, with someone being accused of such. So, pretty scary.
The Coast Guard lieutenant was also targeting prominent MSNBC and CNN journalists, and the White House insists the president condemns the plot.
I certainly don't think that the president at any point has done anything but condemn violence against journalists or anyone else. In fact, every single time something like this happens, the president is typically one of the first people to condemn the violence, and the media is the first people to blame the president.
Hassan had a secret-level security clearance until Tuesday when it was suspended, and authorities have been onto him since last fall when suspicious behavior caught the attention of the Coast Guard's Insider Threat Program. Harris.
Peter Ducey. Wow, so many details to that. Thank you very much. The producers of Empire have announced Jussie Smollett's character will not appear in the season's final 2 episodes. This as the actor denies allegations he staged a hate crime to boost his career and salary, we're told by the police superintendent there. The executive producers released this statement saying, quote, "We are placing our trust in the legal system as the process plays out. We are also aware of the effects of this process on the cast and crew members who work on our show, and to avoid further disruption on set, we have decided to remove the role of Jamal from the final 2 episodes of the season," end quote. I want to bring in now Libby Locke, a defamation attorney. Libby, so good to get your expertise on this. First of all, with the charges against Smollett, and you talk about distraction on set, it's even more than that. He's technically a suspect and also maybe a witness in a case.
Yeah, absolutely, Harris. This is a case where he has been charged with disorderly conduct, filing a false police report through Illinois prosecutors. You saw the police commissioner there and the district attorney talking about the real disruption that happened in the city of Chicago and the cost to the taxpayers. He could face, 1 to 3 years in prison for this kind of false report if he, in fact, made that false report, and also pay restitution to the city of Chicago for all the time and expense that those officials had to go through to bring these charges if he's ultimately found guilty.
Libby, the New York Post, also owned by the company that owns us, did some reporting, and others have today, too, that Jussie Smollett had been arrested for DUI and lied to police about his identity at that time. How does a past like that play into a case like what he's facing now?
Well, that's a really good question, Harris. There are rules of evidence that some prior convictions may be admissible, others not admissible in a criminal trial. It depends on whether the prior criminal conviction goes to his truthfulness and whether he has conduct that is truthful or not, and that kind of character. Here, it'll be an interesting question as to whether that prior conviction comes in. But the other thing that is that people have been talking about, he may very well face criminal charges here. The federal code makes it a crime to use the mail the U.S. mail to attempt to defraud somebody. And that's going to be very interesting to see if federal authorities attempt to bring those charges. And those carry with it much more significant penalties, up to 20 years in jail.
Oh, wow.
And so those are much more serious charges and longer prison terms if those charges are brought.
So, Libby, am I wrong about this? Or it seems like in the last 24 hours or so, because I've been talking with attorneys on the show as well, that the charges or the possibilities are widening.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, the federal mail charges, it's an interesting theory because usually you see these mail charges in bribery cases where an individual sends a letter to someone saying, I'm going to disclose certain facts about you if you don't pay me money, and the federal government says you can't use the mail to attempt to defraud somebody. Here, the allegations are a bit different. Mr. Jussie was alleged to have sent a letter to himself. And so there are a lot of questions that still need answering. Did he present that letter to his bosses at Fox? Did he attempt to use that letter to get more money in his salary negotiations with Fox for his position on his role on Empire? We don't know the answers to those questions yet. But
it's a lot. It's why I framed it in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, but also you become a witness when you're mailing stuff to yourself. Libby Locke, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Pope Francis is calling for some action. The Vatican is holding a historic summit to address the clergy about sex abuse. Chief religion correspondent Lauren Green is live from Rome with more. Lauren?
Okay, Harris. Well, this is the second day of the conference, and today bishops tackled the issue of accountability in relation to the victims, to the community, and, of course, to the law enforcement, the civil authorities. And Chicago's Cardinal Blase Cupich addressed the bishops this morning, outlining 4 principles of how the church should structure accountability. That it should first and foremost, though, be a loving mother and engage in radical listening to victims. But Cupich admitted that, in the end, rules are only words if they're not taken seriously.
Sadly, many of our people, not just those abused or parents of those abused, but the faithful at large, are wondering if we, the leaders of the church, fully understand this sacred bond, this reality, particularly when they see little care given to abused children, or even worse, when it is covered up to protect the abuser or the institution.
Now, the bishops are really trying to change that culture that you're seeing here, and Boston's Cardinal Sean O'Malley said the clergy, at least in America, need to take seriously the civil criminal laws of the land when it comes to child abusers in the church.
There are 50 states, and each state has its own reporting laws. But we believe that there's a moral obligation to share this information with the civil authorities for the safety of children.
And the bishops also say this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to change the culture of the church from a culture of silence to a culture of listening and reporting. Harris.
Lauren Green, live from Rome. Thank you very much. There is new outrage over the possibility that Americans injured or sickened after the worst terror attack on U.S. soil might not continue to get the help they need. Why the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund is running out of cash.
When heartburn
Fox News Alert, breaking news in Chicago now. The Sun-Times newspaper is reporting that R&B superstar R. Kelly has been charged with 10 counts of aggravated criminal sexual abuse in Cook County. As you may know, a television series had featured some of the alleged victims against him, who were minors at the time. They say that he took sexual advantage of them. And there has been word of charges over the years. But now R. Kelly being charged in Cook County with aggravated criminal sexual abuse. And this morning we also learned that his first court date is listed from court records in Cook County as March 8th. His attorney, Stephen Greenberg, has not spoken on this yet, so we are waiting on this developing story. As this comes up, it is, of course, all eyes on Chicago. We've got the Jussie Smollett story going on there, and now you've got R. Kelly through years and years of allegations and a recent television series on him with alleged victims. R. Kelly is charged with aggravated criminal sexual abuse, 10 counts in Cook County, Illinois. We'll apprise you as the details come forth. Growing calls now for Congress to reauthorize the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund. This comes 1 week after the administrator announced the fund is strapped for cash and that new claims will have to be significantly reduced. Brian Yennis is live in our New York City newsroom. Brian? Actually, no, he's not. He's quite outside, and it is quite cold. Brian?
Hi, Harris. Yeah, I was in the New York City newsroom earlier today, but now here at Ground Zero. And look, Harris, firefighters spoke earlier today. Firefighters that were not only here on 9/11, but who stayed in the weeks and months after to help in the recovery efforts. Some 200 firefighters have died due to 9/11 related illnesses. Some 6,500 firefighters, more than half of those who responded on 9/11, are now sick or dying due to these 9/11 related illnesses. These are folks who were exposed to the toxic dust that was thrust into the air in the wake of the collapse of the World Trade Center. And 9/11 firefighters like Eric Bischoff, diagnosed with stage 2 cancer 18 months ago, they are now pleading with lawmakers to fund the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund, which is rapidly running out of money.
My case means nothing. If you're a sick or dying firefighter, go up to Cornell or Sloan, see these firefighters that are there. It's incredible. I don't know what the permanent solution is, but I know this much. The fund was authorized to protect people who got sick for their work at the World Trade Center. There are still people getting sick, so the intent of the fund did not meet its original, target, because there's still plenty of sick people.
The $7.3 billion victim fund was started in 2011. So far, $5 billion has gone to 20,000 plus claims, leaving just $2.3 billion for 20,000 pending or future claims. So now fund organizers need to cut pending claims, the awards given out to pending claims by 50%, and they need to cut future claims and the awards given out by 70%. Harris, there is bipartisan legislation that will be introduced on Monday to permanently fund the VCF so there doesn't have to be another reauthorization in the future. Harris?
Brian Yennis, thank you very much. I'll be right back.
In these volatile markets, which
Big breaking news today. New England Patriots owner Bob Kraft charged with soliciting prostitution in a Florida human trafficking sex ring. And ESPN is reporting that he's not the biggest name involved in this. Plus, the Chicago Tribune saying Jussie Smollett needs to apologize to the city of Chicago. We'll talk to one of the editors. And Tyrus will weigh in on Zion Williamson, Shoegate, and Space Jam 2. So don't miss the Daily Briefing.
Senator Bernie Sanders says he plans to sign a pledge to run for president as a Democrat in 2020 if he's nominated after his status as an independent was criticized by some Democrats. Sochi Inahosa is communications director for the Democratic National Committee. Great to see you today. So why make him sign a pledge at this point? I know he says he will. Is it necessary?
Well, we welcome him to the race, and frankly, all candidates will be signing a pledge. This is something that we'll be getting to them in the next week or so, and as candidates get in the race, we will make sure that everybody signs a pledge because this is a new rule under the DNC's rules and bylaws.
What does the pledge say?
That you need to run as a Democrat. But Harris, I want to remind you is that Tom Perez this year has made it very clear that he wants to make sure that we have a fair and inclusive primary process, and this is part of that primary process.
Okay.
And we want to make sure that voters are able to talk about the ideas with these candidates, and that's why we have scheduled debates that will start in June to give our candidates just that.
Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist, right? Like, nobody's making that a bigger issue than he is already. So my question is, when New York Democrat Representative Gregory Meek says that Bernie Sanders should not be allowed to run in a Democratic primary, what do you say when people in your own party don't support this?
That is up to Senator Sanders whether or not he wants to run as a Democrat. And as you stated, he does want to run as a Democrat. I will also point out with you
support of Democrats who don't agree with that?
That will be up to the voters to decide on who they want their Democratic nominee to be. But I just want to be clear that we're giving voters that ability to make that decision, while the Republican Party right now doesn't even want to have a primary when it comes to Donald Trump. And so when it comes to the primary itself, we have made clear that we want it to be as inclusive as possible, and our responsibility at the DNC is to make sure that we are fair and that we are not putting our thumb on the scale.
We're talking past each other because I'm trying to drill down on whether or not he's the right candidate for your party when some Democrats don't agree. One of them, former Hillary Clinton protege and staffer, is Antoine Seawright just days ago on this program. Let's watch it.
He's an independent senator running under the Democratic umbrella. I think there's some discussion at the DNC level about whether he can do that.
Wow, DNC level, like you would kick out Bernie. Look, the DNC has had a problem with Bernie Sanders in the past. Many of the voters felt like he was held back against Hillary Clinton. Your last words.
The DNC does not have a problem with Bernie Sanders. We want to make sure there is an inclusive process, and the voters will decide who our nominee is. It's our responsibility to make sure that process is fair.
It'll be curious to see if anybody can raise money like Senator Sanders has since his announcement.
A lot of them have already, which is pretty incredible right now.
Not like Sanders. Sochi Inahosa, thank you for being with me from the DNC. I'll be right back.
Thanks so much for having me.
Ruby Tuesday's dinner for two. Just